Very nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm also very happy to talk about this topic, which will be on a case from Norway, but will have also kind of much more international focus, as you will see a little bit later. So just very quickly, and just to introduce myself. So I'm a music researcher. I'm a research musician. I also run a research center, a very interdisciplinary center between musicology, psychology, and informatics. But most of all, for the reason I'm invited here, I guess, is that I've for some time been an open research advocate. And this is because I've been the Norwegian representative to EUA's expert group on open science for the last 5 years. And for those of you who don't know, the EUA is the European University Association, and it's an umbrella association for all universities or many universities and university colleges around Europe, around 800 institutions. And there is a lot of policy development and kind of sharing of knowledge, etc., between the different institutions in Europe on this matter. And particularly also the focus on open science has been, as you know, has been a big transition that has happened over the last few years. And it's been very interesting to be part of developing the policies also surrounding this at the European level and beyond. And that will be at the core of what I'm talking about. Now, as for the topic of this this school here, it's a bit interesting because before I started studying music and ended up as a professor of music technology, I actually started my career because I wanted to be an astrophysicist. So that's a bit of a coincidence that I'm here today. So I started studying physics and mathematics at University of Oslo, and the plan was to actually then pursue a master degree in astrophysics. And I also ran the European Space Camp at Andøya rocket range for 7 years. So I was part of that team kind of developing this, shooting rockets and kind of studying the stratosphere, etc. So there is actually an SME kind of on the corner there. Quite a long time ago. So but that's a side note. I'm not going to talk about that here. And I'm not either going to talk about the research we're doing at my research center, where I'm currently now also with people talking about large and complex data sets. We don't have that large data sets, but we have relatively complex data sets. And this is from the large data collection I did, which was on studying the heart rate and respiration and motion of symphony orchestra people on stage, full symphony orchestra, and including also 1,000 audience members. And this is the type of research I'm doing now, trying to understand how music influences people and how people can kind of create new different types of music. Anyways, that's a sidestep now. And if you're interested, I can talk more about that later over coffee. Anyways, here today, I'm going to talk about open science and how we can promote that. I should say that since I have a dual background, both in the science and also in arts and humanities, I preferred often the term open research because I feel that's more inclusive. But in kind of a lot of the policy making, etc., open science has kind of been chosen as kind of the term. But I just want to mention it so that you're aware of that not all researchers are kind of necessarily feeling that they are scientists as such. But you know, you've heard a lot about open science these days. So my take on this is that if you're thinking about the process of doing research, from making an application and to actually do the research, then getting some results, and then evaluate or someone evaluating whatever you have done, most of what is happening today is still kind of black box. On the result side, we are getting more grayish, and as we go, I mean, and many of the examples that have been shown here today show that we are kind of slowly trying to kind of make things more openly available, but still we are far from that in reality. And if you think about the different building blocks of kind of an open science landscape, there are many different components and there are different variations of this. But one of the ideas is that we want to kind of promote and figure out how can we open and make all of these really accessible. On the most extreme side, going from open applications even, so that when you're submitting an application to a funding agency, that too is open, and that the assessment of that is open and kind of transparent, etc., etc., and all the way until the end. On the other side of it, that the open assessment of your career as well, perhaps, is open. That's at least the extreme side of things. But then how do we get there? That's the big question. Now, for many researchers, or at least early career researchers, and kind of important question, will I get a job after I'm done with whatever I'm doing, after my master degree, or after my PhD, after my postdoc, etc.? How will kind of making more open research help me get a job at the end? Well, it is a challenging question right now, and also as the center director, where I'm head of around 55 people, then of course many of my PhDs and postdocs come to me and say, how will I get a job? Because we are right now, we're at the transition stage where we have kind of this massive move towards open research, but there's still also some conservatism around and at different institutions among people, etc., that kind of prevent us for actually making this happen. And then also for those that are in a position, then of course, if you want to get promotion, for example, to a full professorship or something like that, again, will doing open research help me in any single way? Or if I apply for funding from anywhere, will it help me get funded? That's the big question, and that's the big hurdle. And that's also one of the things that we have been discussing in this expert group that I've been in for some years. We have, through various European workshops, we have been discussing this at various stages and kind of try to get feedback from many different places. And there's also been a lot of policy development coming over the last few years. An important document here is this EU document that came in 2017, kind of with the first open science career assessment matrix as kind of being a kind of an element of this report, and I'll get back to that. The Netherlands have also worked hard on this with this report called Room for Everyone's Talent, which is kind of shown that it's possible to think more broadly about how you assess researchers. And then the Norwegian report that came 2 years ago now, and I was part of developing, called NORCAM, came and has also inspired some of the European thinking on this right now. So I'll delve a little bit into this, and then I'll get to the European level afterwards. Now, this NORCAM report, and this is available online, also in English, if you want to read it, is really about talking about how can we create a toolbox, and this is mainly for institutions, for recognition and rewards of academic careers. So this is a kind of more of an institutional policy document, but it's important to know that this will also influence then researchers and how they behave. So there are 6 principles that are outlined in this report. And the first one is that we need to kind of get beyond metrics and or only metrics and kind of measure quality and excellence through a better balance between quantitative and qualitative goals. So we're not saying that we should get rid of all metrics, but we need to balance it out. And you kind of need to go beyond looking at journal impact factors, age index, etc., as kind of one number kind of summarizing a person. We need to kind of look more qualitatively at whoever is going to be evaluated. Then it's also important to recognize several competencies as merits. So in the current system, there's been a lot of focus on the singular article, kind of a singular publication, but less so on everything else. And which is a problem, because if it's only the article that counts, then why should you spend time on making data available or source code available or teach or anything else? So it should also be said that we're not trying to say that everyone should be super people here. So it's not everyone needs to do everything, but it should allow for kind of more flexibility and also in careers. Then, of course, as a kind of a basis for all the policy development that we have been doing is that we want kind of to see a transition to open science in general. So that's kind of being an underlying kind of criterion. We have also focused a lot on practicing transparency, again, also openness, so that you know what you're going to be evaluated on if you apply for a job or for funding, etc. And this also is important for kind of figuring out how to kind of promote gender balance and diversity also, and diversity here thought of broadly. And assist institutions and also individuals in concrete practice of how they should go about documenting their careers, and also for institutions to figure out how to hire using these type of principles. So that's the kind of the principles that may sound okay, but how do we get down to practice? Well, the actual NORCAM, the Norwegian Career Assessment Matrix, and I should say this is just a suggestion, but it looks like a matrix, and I will describe what it is. This matrix can be seen as a tool to help move forwards. So I'm not saying that this is going to be implemented as is, but it's a kind of a way of thinking about how we can move forwards. So it contains 6 columns, or no, it's 6 rows in the first column, and these are the 6 areas to be assessed, and I'll get back to them shortly. Then at the top, there you see column 2, examples of results and competencies. Then we have the third column, which is the documentation. And then we have the fourth column, which is a reflection of this. And this is an important part because what we are suggesting is that we shouldn't get rid of kind of the traditional CV and jump and move over to only narrative CVs, but you should have a kind of combination of some kind of documentary evidence and also a reflective component, so that it's not enough to kind of just put up your list of everything you've done. You also need to reflect and also explain why is this important. And on the other hand, it's not enough to say I'm fantastic if you don't have any documentary evidence to kind of support those claims. So that's kind of the idea, that you have this kind of balance between what can be measured or somehow documented and what is your reflection on why this matters. So for each of them, the different competencies, there are, we can also try to identify sources for kind of this documentation. So for example, if you look at the first area, research output, which is kind of the most traditional one, there you have published works, your data set, software, kind of various types of methodological descriptions, artistic results, research reports, etc. These are just examples, but they kind of show this kind of the outcome of what can be included. And then there are various types of quiz systems, that's kind of research systems where that in different ways document these things. Some countries have national systems, some institutions have institutional systems, and there are also various types of international systems floating around for this. The general problem, though, is that there are still problems with interoperability between these different systems, and also moving between institutions and countries, etc., makes it difficult. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to also have the documentary evidence part in a systematic manner here. And of course, also then you would need to reflect on why, for example, this publication or this data set is of importance. Moving on, what is new is that we also explicitly focus on research process as something that should be evaluated and assessed in addition to the kind of the outputs as such. And this could be anything of kind of just being part of a research group or lead a research group and kind of build network and do peer review and other things. And again, here on the documentary side, here, of course, this is even more problematic. How do you document these things in a systematic manner? Here we need to do a lot of work. Then, of course, we are talking about career, not only researchers, but also in academic careers. Research is only one part of what you're doing, and many are also teaching. So you also need to document your pedagogical competency and also what type of teaching you've done. And again, there is a lack of documentary evidence for this. Then impact and innovation is important. Many people ask about that. How do you engage with society in different ways? And again, there are many different types of examples here. And there are also, here there is a lack of systematic documentary evidence for how this can kind of be shown in a CV context. Leadership, yet another thing. How do you engage in various types of service at your institution, either through sitting on boards or taking on various types of leadership roles, etc. And how, again, is also that documented. And then finally, other experience, which can be also things that you're doing if you're working for industry or if you're doing working for other organizations, anything that you feel is relevant for your work outside of a normal academic context. And this is also because in the future, we believe that you need to have multiple paths in and out of academia, and we need to also have systems that allow for this to happen. So that's kind of the core elements of the Norwegian Career Assessment Matrix as a model. And as of now, this was then sent out to all Norwegian institutions 2 years ago, and all the institutions are currently trying to implement this, kind of based also on their own needs. So, for example, at my own university, the University of Oslo, we have a kind of local version of this now being implemented that will kind of be used for example, when you're now hiring new people, they will need to be kind of follow not exactly the same, but kind of a similar type of thinking when they apply. Now, let's move to the European level. As I said, the Norwegian work was highly inspired by what came out of the European University Association, and I think the Norwegian work has highly inspired UA also in moving forwards. And together with Science Europe, which is the kind of umbrella organization for many of the funders in Europe, EUA and Science Europe teamed up and said that, well, we need to do something together. We need really to kind of push if we want this to happen. And the problem is that it's kind of the first mover problem here, who kind of wants kind of to take a lead, but then also what you risk if you're taking a lead. So it's also very nice that the European Commission was also in part of this development, and then kind of joined forces in developing what became the agreement on reforming research assessment, which came out last summer. You may have heard about this. And this is kind of coming up with many of the same principles that we had in the Norwegian report, kind of said slightly differently, but again, it says it's focusing on diversity of contributions, on qualitative evaluation and kind of on peer review. Also explicitly saying that you should abandon inappropriate uses of, for example, the journal impact factor and H index as a way of summarizing a person. Avoid use of rankings of organizations, commit resources to reforming research assessment. So you should actually make this happen. Review and develop these things, raise awareness that there is a need to change something. Exchange practices, communicate progress, and also evaluate these practices. Now, so this document came out last year, and then institutions around Europe and also beyond were asked if they wanted to sign this. And I'm very happy to see that by now 539 organizations have signed this document and joined the coalition on research assessment. And there are also now also institutions outside of Europe. This is not a European thing. It started from Europe, but it's also kind of reaching beyond. And it's interesting to see the uptake. And also then if the institutions actually sign this document, they will actually also need to adhere to these principles as they move forwards. Exactly how that's going to be done, that's a big question. That's what they're going to work on right now. Okay, so let's try to see if we could make this more close to an individual researcher. One of the things that we worked on in the Norwegian career assessment matrix was to figure out how can we create some kind of automatic and standardized CV system. Because as you see here, many people would think, oh, wow, this is a lot of work. How on earth am I going to do this? And the thinking is that, well, it shouldn't lead to more work, rather the opposite. Ideally, it should lead to less work and make it easier for people also to move and spend their careers in different institutions and different countries, etc. The problem then is how to make a system that is both user-friendly. It should, of course, be web-based, and particularly this one, how to retrieve and exchange data between different national and international systems and integrate this with various types of recruitment assessment systems. And the problem we want to avoid is this mess here, which is kind of I'm not sure how many CVs you have been formatting over the years, but probably a bunch if you kind of count and how much time you spend every time you do this. So, for example, also something I think is super annoying. This is if anyone wants to apply for a job at my university, they need to go through this portal here, which asks everyone to also manually do a lot of work here, upload, manually go and click and add there. I did my PhD here, I did this and that, etc. I mean, I always, when I look at lists for example, for some kind of PhD or postdoc position, I see that people have spent so much time on inputting all these things. They spent hours on inputting this in our system. I really feel so bad. It's a shame, really, from my institutional point of view and for everyone else as well. And this is only one institution, right? I mean, so if you're applying for multiple institutions, you have the same nightmare everywhere, that you need to kind of use these systems that don't talk together or talk poorly together. Same thing if you're applying for funding. These are just some random places I've been applying for funding over the last few years. But again, all of them had different CV formats where you kind of, and these are usually some kind of poorly formatted Word documents. And even I'm on a Linux computer, for example, and these Word templates with random stuff inside, I mean, they never behave properly on my Linux system, for example. That's an annoyance, but still the main point is that you need to manually kind of format and say, oh, here should the dates come before in that order, or should kind of the institutional income before that or that, right? I mean, we spend so much time just totally unnecessary on these things. And this needs to stop. really, seriously. We spend so much research money on this. It's totally unacceptable. So that's why we really need to make a change. Okay, are there any solutions there? Well, of course, there are some commercial interests now pushing for this. Well, ORCID, perhaps not the most commercial, but I mean, there are, at least ORCID is a good way of thinking about how can you connect people and identify people. So that's a good starting point. Another good thing with ORCID is that at least you can import and export from there. So it's possible to get some kind of exchange. But of course, we have all these other platforms that researchers spent a lot or little time on. I mean, ResearchGate is one of them, which kind of teases you and helps you kind of move and include things. But you can put things into the system, but it's very difficult to get things out of the system, right? Which is also a pain. And the same goes for academia.edu. Again, it's teasing you, helping you to include your stuff. But again, very difficult to get anything back. LinkedIn is also yet another platform now. It's not particularly academic, but again, also people use there. So it's just, there are so many platforms out there that we need to use and deal with and that we spend time on. But again, you kind of inputting material and don't getting it back again. Then you have other solutions, like, for example, Europass, which is a European system, but this is not an academic system, so it kind of works, well, it doesn't work that well for academic careers. And also, again, it doesn't have that kind of input-output thing, although we can at least get a kind of some kind of standardized CV out of it. And then finally, integration is yet another thing, which I think is important to think about. So this is from the Norwegian Kristin, which is our system for documenting things, which is, as you see, look pretty old school, but at least it's possible to input things there. And you can also, this is also used nationally for reporting everything we're doing. So our publication points is coming through, is based on kind of entering material into this database. The nice thing about it, at least, is that we have integration with the University of Oslo's web pages, so that on my personal page at the University of Oslo, then the list of publications at the bottom of that of my web page is coming automatically from this Kristin system. That's fine for me, and now I'm a permanent employee at the University of Oslo, so I have my career there, and it's fine. I use this system, but of course, it's problematic for any type of international researcher that comes in and out of our system, because how are they going to integrate this with their systems, and also how do new people coming into our institution, for example, also get the same type of thing. Then you need to do a lot of manual updating and inputs. Okay, I've been speaking fast and a lot, but I wanted to save some time for discussion, because I think this is an important thing to discuss. To summarize, what is happening now is that QARA, the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, is now starting up based on those institutions that are willing. They have launched the first call for working groups and national chapters. So this is also an opportunity to get involved, really, because there are going to be lots and lots of working groups on many different things here. Because you see, if you want to try to cover and kind of improve these things, there's not one thing to improve here. There are many, many things to improve. So I would suggest that if you don't want to get involved yourself, and I think there are many opportunities to get involved, please do ask around you to see if someone in your department, your institute, your faculty, your institution is involved or will be involved in this or not, because the train is moving now, and it's important to jump on and be part of this if you want to kind of make a change. And then in general, of course, as has been said a lot here, working openly to start with kind of improves things a lot, because if you want to make your CV and document what you're doing, of course, if you do it openly, then things are generally more available, particularly also if you adhere to the FAIR principles. I would say also that you should document everything. And often I hear when I talk to my PhDs and postdocs, I mean, they focus a lot on their publications and their research part of things. And I'm trying to tell to them, if you want to get a faculty job at some point, there's a lot of things you need to do beyond research. You need to do teaching, you need to do leadership, et cetera, funding, and so on. So I always tell everyone that you should document everything you're doing systematically. Try to also use kind of the same type of principles that you are kind of employing for your open research work. Try to employ that also for your teaching, for your outreach activities, and also was just heard before here, kind of how can you systematically kind of make presentations and kind of document that type of thing. put a license on everything. I mean, it's a simple thing to say, but there are still so many things floating around that don't have a license on them. And it makes it so difficult to figure out how to reuse these things in a way or not. So just make it a habit to put a license on absolutely everything you're doing. And of course, it would be nice to have an open license, but if you, even a permissive license or more restricted license would work if at least kind of acknowledge how a file or data could be used. Then also a lot of what I'm talking about now is coming. It's a lot of kind of these kind of top-down type of things coming now. There's a massive kind of political support for a change in many countries. But the change doesn't come by itself. The change, kind of changing from underneath, changing kind of the culture is more challenging. And the culture starts with all of us. So all of us can also question the use of kind of questionable metrics if we kind of come across them, and kind of make it a habit to question kind of how people are assessed and evaluated as you go. So that's also something that all of us can do in our daily lives. Whenever we do a peer review, you can ask for different things. You can question how things are done. Also, if you sit on some kind of committee, hiring committee, board, anything, really, you can also question, why don't we consider this and that here? Because a lot of this cultural change is really about talking about how do we actually want that the world should look like. So we need to figure out how can we combine these top-down things that are coming now increasingly with kind of a more of a bottom-up approach, and ideally also that these would be connected in a good way. I think that's what I had for now. Then we have time for questions and comments. Thanks.
Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions on Zoom, feel free to raise your hand, but we have a question here in the audience from Lourdes.
Hello, thank you very much. Have a comment and question. A comment is question the use of metrics. I was laughing about that because for several years now, I put in my CV, I put the metrics and I say, and also I've been spending a lot of time in my career questioning the use of these metrics. And I always put this sentence in my CV. And I was going to ask, there is this Norwegian matrix for preparing the CV. Do you know about others in other countries, or is there any particular reason why this happened in Norway, for example?
Well, first of all, the Norwegian Career Assessment Matrix is a model. It's not implemented as such. It's more of a conceptual idea and a way to move forwards. There are many other countries that work on similar concepts. The Netherlands, kind of in particular, Finland. Also here in Spain, I know that there's activity going on when it comes to this. And I think the kind of the work of Quara now will be where this will be implemented somehow to figure out exactly how this should be done at European level, because the reason it happened in Norway was because of me, mainly because I was sitting in this committee and coming back and kind of pushing for this to happen. And then it's kind of been going back and forth. That's how it works in this when you work between the national and international level. But ultimately, we see that if you want to make a change, you need to do it everywhere, right? I mean, we need an international change here. It doesn't really matter what we do in Norway if we don't agree about it. But I mean, one of the reasons why this work didn't receive so much resistance in Norway was that it's not really that different than a lot of things we already had working, because we already had a broad set of categories that we assessed when, for example, applying for an associate professor position. So it wasn't really that different, but there's a system to it that is different, and it's kind of the matrix-like system, and also the idea of automatizing these things, and particularly the exchange of information, which is really a pain in how do you document it, right? And we have all these fancy systems around us all the time, but we still don't have a good system for how to integrate them. So I think that's what is going to happen in Quara now, and that's why it's important to be involved and really support this change.
Any other questions? Anybody on Zoom? Just want to reflect a bit on what you said about, documenting everything and about how open practices really help you build your CV. Because a lot of the worry that you hear from people is that, how am I going to get credit for all of this extra work that I'm doing? But if you're sharing your data and you get a DOI for it, you add that to your list of research outputs, and that's how you get credit for it. And it really bulks up your CV. It makes it more visible about how much work you're actually doing. Instead of just the single line for your publication, it actually, demonstrates how much effort and work you've done because you've openly shared everything and you've generated all of these outputs. So yeah, and I think the licensing as well is really important, but I also think it also scares a lot of people because licenses is, legal jargon. They can be really scary, but there are tools out there to help you find like the best license for your output so that it's reused in a way that works best for you and for the community. So yeah, thank you for highlighting those.
Yeah.
There's a question in the back.
I wonder, how do you give credit to the artistic arts, for example, concerts and the like? How do you document that?
Well, I mean, the nice thing about most of the arts is that it's documented. Often you have a recording of a performance and you write down where it was, etc. So,
but I mean more live concerts, which are not recorded.
Well, still, I mean, you can also, typically what is done in art is now is that you put it in your CV as the concepts you have had, and then you have there's not a systematic way of doing it, but people include program notes and these things. So it's equally problematic as everything else we're doing, how to document it.
Well, that just country dependent, I guess, because here in Spain it's quite crazy. It's not like, you put the notes and that's like you need a letter from the head of the festival or whatever to sign it after that, and that's really complicated. So I don't know if this is gonna be a European way to unify this in that regard. So I was wondering what are the other countries doing.
Well, I think this also depends on who's going to read it on the other side. So, I mean, also me, I evaluate people in many countries all the time for promotion or for hiring and for funding, etc. So it's people like us that also are reviewing each other. So, I mean, it's something about the system kind of ask for something, but ultimately, I mean, there's a bunch of researchers sitting on the other side receiving all this information. And the interesting thing is that a lot of what, for example, a funding agency asks for, the reviewers may not really care about at all, really, when they're looking at this thing, which is also a bit odd in the way kind of the system works now. And as you're saying, I mean, there may be some kind of rigidity on kind of some kind of documentation, but then again, the system doesn't help you. It rather kind of, it prevents you from, or it makes you spend more time on the documentation. And I guess that's one of the things we're working on now, is to figure out how can we more systematically document these things and also do it automatically so that we don't need to get kind of signatures from this and there, etc. Right? I mean, it's so much kind of time wasted. And come on, I mean, if you look at how the world works now and the web, and I mean, you can have ChatGPT do whatever. I mean, why shouldn't we be able to kind of automatize kind of these things?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Do you have a question, Julian?
Yeah. So something that you said before is that not everyone should be doing everything. This is said in NORCAN, this is said in COARA. But I wanted to know your opinion on maybe one risk. So even if you have the procedures in place to assess the careers, acknowledging the different practices, outputs and results, in the end, I'm not sure how things work in Norway, but there is also maybe the risk of not prioritizing profiles that are related to these other things. So do you have an opinion on that? Maybe?
Yeah, no, that's one of the big problems. And it's also one of the reasons why we need to highlight that this is often you kind of have, or at least sometimes it's been kind of that you have one particular type of academic career in mind, or kind of the institution is built around having, for example, one particular type of person that they're looking for. But if you want to build a successful team, you need to have a lot of different competencies involved there. And then you also need to have systems that allow for recruiting in such a way that you can build your team in a good way. But this is more about the culture thing, I think, in terms of what has value, right? And unfortunately today, having a science paper has more value than sharing code. That's just how it is. So if you have a science paper, you will more likely be higher than if you share your code. And that's how it is, unfortunately, these days. But if you mainly want someone to actually work on coding and help with that type of thing, it doesn't really matter with that science paper. So, well, that's a bit extreme, but you get the point. I mean, we need to figure out how can we allow for flexibility in terms of how to build good research communities locally, and how can we make systems that will allow for supporting that, and also for allowing for having kind of diversity both on the input and the output, you could say, of the institutional borders.
Okay, so if I got it right, you are saying that unless we have this change in research culture, that risk is going to be there.
Yeah, but I mean, this is kind of the bottom up and top down where they meet in a way, I guess, because I mean, I'm also now speaking both as kind of a person working at the European policy level, but I'm also a director of a research center, kind of hiring postdocs and PhDs and others. So I see this from both perspectives. But ultimately, their local research culture of an institution that's based on the leaders in that institution is kind of the heads of departments and the center directors or lab leaders or whatever they are who hires. We need to change the culture among them as well, right? Of course, if you get a push from above, that often helps, kind of because kind of political signals from the top also kind of push the leaders, and also if funding is also connected to that. But then the reason we need to do this internationally is that in many systems, you have people from other institutions from other countries sitting on committees, for example. And then if you have one very progressive institution, and then you have other conservative institutions, and you have kind of committee members from those more conservative institutions, it may be difficult to actually make a change, even though kind of the local institution wants to make a change. So that's why the kind of the culture element is there. But that's also why I say that we need to kind of question these things, and kind of also, for example, when I sit on committees and people say, well, if you have a list of 30 people you want to hire, and then sometimes when I come to committee meetings, they have ranked people based on the H index, and they say, well, the one with the highest H index should get the job. And I always question that. I say that, well, that's not how the world works. I mean, we shouldn't hire people based on the H index. But then that's kind of a cultural change that is a negotiation between kind of people that are sitting on these committees. And that's why it's important to kind of, again, continuously try to make that try to kind of also make a change at the local level. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from Zoom. If Morteza would like to unmute.
Yeah. Hi, and thank you for a nice talk. I'm agree that these writing CVs or such things is sometimes spending a huge amount of time and so, but sometimes it gives us the free hand to change our CVs whenever we want to send to different universities, different institutions with diversity and so many different field of the fields are different, so sometimes we change our CVs if we want to send, and we emphasize, we highlighted on some background of us, and then we send it. So if we want to unificate all of these things, so I think then it take us these advantages that we found we could change, or we could highlight something in our CVs if we want to send to different institutes. So do you think is a way to, if we want to unificate these things, so I think it close our hand in these things, yeah.
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. And just to clarify, so the idea is not that that all CVs should look the same. So it's more about making a system that would allow for these things to be interchanged in a systematic manner. And that means that, for example, if say that you're applying for one kind of data manager job and one assistant professor job, that would be two different jobs. And then the institution would probably also ask for different things when they set up their kind of recruitment system. And for example, then teaching will obviously be important if you're applying for an assistant professor job, but perhaps not for a data manager job. But then the institution would kind of set up the system with this matrix-like system, and they can choose which elements they want to have included. And then when you go into the system and want to apply, you click on import my data, and then all your data will be imported, and then you can choose whatever you want to have included. And you can also create your write your reflection and modify that to see fit to that particular position. So I totally agree with you. Dependent on where you're applying, what type of job you're applying for, funding, etc., you will need to do some tailor making on top of what's already there. But at least the documentary side of things would ideally become automatic, so you don't need to go and get all those letters signed by someone on paper and scan them, etc. But that this should be based on systems that talk to each other in a systematic manner. I hope that was clarifying.
Yeah, thanks.
We have time for one final question. Anybody on Zoom?
If I might, Rachel. So just wondering if there is anyone with interest in joining, for example, one of the Quora working groups, what do they have to do?
So right now, Quora is handled through the institutions that have signed. So you can go on the Quora webpage and you can check if your institution has signed Quora or not. If they haven't signed, you can ask them, could you sign, please? It's not too late to sign up. Then you can send it through your leadership system. Of course, it will be the rector, president of your university that will need to actually sign. But then all institutions that have signed can also then suggest members for these working groups. And I guess this comes from institution to institution how that is handled internally. But there is a lot of working groups that will be established, and it will be possible to also through your institution somehow get involved.
One final question, if I may, Rachel. So, could you give us some advice if you really want to have a CV that shows open science practices? What would you recommend? To try to have like a section that describes your work and how you are practicing this, or maybe just to include like keywords all over the CV to somehow show where do you really apply this open science principles?
Well, I think both, perhaps. I mean, of course, if you make a CV in a standard way, like a PDF file, you could, of course, include links on everything to DOIs and whatnot you have out there, just to show that exactly that there is information there. And of course, also, if you are systematic when it comes to, for example, including data and source code with your publications, that should also show up. I've seen some people also making kind of small symbols to show that they have like different types of licenses and things also in their CV, so that you can see that this is a CC by kind of paper and these things. But also if you have a section where it's possible to have more of a kind of a narrative or reflection, you could also reflect on that you are actually thinking about open science, but you should do it in a way that so it actually shows that you are passionate about this, because it's very easy now to say that, oh yeah, I'm doing open access, right? I mean, it's so easy to kind of just put it into any type of application, but the proof is in the pudding. So you need to kind of show that you actually done it properly. So I think the daily practice is really the best way of doing it. And of course, what I say to everyone applying for jobs, have a good web page. That is where you have documentary evidence to what you're doing. That's ultimately also important. When we hire, we always Google people.